As we start to take a look at these PoE admin states, I want to stay on the board here for the first couple of choices, and you'll see why in just a moment. But to go over the four options for power inline, we have auto, and we saw that was the default on our switch because every port was set to auto. Automatically detect and power inline devices. Hey, sounds great. That's what we want to do. Consumption, configure the inline device consumption. Okay. Never apply inline power. Okay. And static, high priority inline power interface. That sounds good, but high priority, that's a little vague. That can mean a lot of things. We will get to that one, but let's hit auto first. Now, auto allows the switch to deliver up to 30 watts. Sounds familiar again because I mentioned it in the last video. And to change that maximum, you can use the max option. And your command to that point would be power inline auto max, as shown here in the middle of the screen. Now, take care with the numeric value you set here, because this command doesn't use watts. It uses milliwatts, MW. So if we wanted our IP phone to receive 5 watts maximum, regardless of how much power the phone actually asks for, we would use the command power inline auto max 5000. Now you might look at this and say, well, Chris, iOS help says I can set it from 4,000 to 15,400, so I wouldn't have to worry about setting it to 5. Well, not in real life, but we all know the exam and multiple choice might give you options that don't exist. So I think that's a good thing for you to know. That is in milliwatts. Now the consumption option, configure the inline device consumption. That sounds a little odd. And there's a little confusion on this particular option out there, and we're going to clear that up right now. But the question is, if we can set the max amount of voltage to send to a device with power inline auto max, why do we need a separate command for consumption? Well, this option actually goes back to the default operation of PoE. And when our switch detects a power needy device, if you will, the switch initially will send all the power it can. It's going to send all the power that that particular port is allowed to send. Well, in turn, the device that's getting the power is going to send CDP packets to the switch. And of course, that's how we were able to see we had a Cisco IP phone. Now, the switch reads the CDP info, realizes how much power the device actually needs, and then throttles back on the power being sent to that device. Makes perfect sense, right? Because this way, the device still gets all the power it needs while the switch conserves its own precious energy. Because one thing I'm gonna hit you with over the head a couple times in this video, the switch has a certain amount of power it can hand out. It is not infinite. It cannot power everything that we can possibly plug in. So we want to be careful about that. And we really like this because this way, in this particular instance, our IP phone, it's operational, but we're only sending over the power we need to send. We're not draining unnecessary energy from the switch. Now, we love that, and that is the default operation. That's all fine and dandy, but what if CDP isn't running on this connection? What if you want to turn it on and the head chief admin and bottle washer at the company you're at doesn't want you to turn CDP on? What if you wanted to just lower that maximum power send at the beginning of the entire process? Well, that's where power inline consumption comes in handy. Because if we want to set the initial power send to 6.5 watts on that port, we'd use power inline consumption 6500. And you see it on the board here. I kind of spoiled the surprise, but let me, well, I thought I was going to show it. There we go. Let me show you what that's going to look like. Let's see, config T, let's go up to 48. It's power inline consumption. And again, it's in milliwatts. So we'll set this to 6500. And we get a big fat caution warning. Misconfiguring the power inline consumption / allocation command may cause damage to the switch and void your warranty. Those are 3 words that send you chill up your spine, or at least they should. Take precaution not to oversubscribe the power supply. Truer words have never been spoken. Refer to documentation. That means you really need to go look this stuff up before you go changing a lot of this. So what I will do, of course, is just go back up, put a Control A, do a Control A to move to the front, and I'll set it back to the default with no power inline consumption, 6500, and I still get the message even though I'm setting it back to the same value that it was at. So you really got to be careful with that kind of thing, and Cisco is just telling you that, not in advance, but when you need to know it. And again, I want to revisit that because you see this feature, it's like, hey, this is great. I'll plug in, these phones, and I'll plug in this other stuff, and I'll plug in this other stuff, and it's all coming for the switch. Yeah, but it's not coming automatically. It's coming from somewhere inside that switch. And I'm not saying that you can only hook one device up via PoE. I am not saying that. But I am saying you have to be really, really careful with that because you don't want to start draining your switch's power or overload it because you got it supplying electricity to so many different devices. What you have to be careful about, a couple of things actually. You got to watch how many PoE connections you're allowing. You have to watch how much power these connections are using. It's not just the number of connections, it's the sheer wattage they're using. And you've got to take into consideration the extra heat that is going to be generated by power over Ethernet because that switch is going to get warmer and warmer and warmer. And actually, when you go out, if you go out to Cisco's website, they have some great PoE documentation out there. It's very well written, very understandable. It's so good you'd think I wrote it. And he said modestly, but the thing is, when you go out, if you pull the PoE documentation for a certain switch model, it's even going to tell you at the top, Cisco's going to tell you point blank, hey, you really need to go look at this other PDF we have installing PoE and make sure that you understand that you need to make sure that you've got enough cooling in your server room to be running the amount of PoE that you run. Not just that the switch can run it, but that you are sufficiently cooling that switch. It's one of those things we really don't think about otherwise because we got the fans going on and everything, but the fans in a switch may not be enough when you start putting a lot of devices on there via PoE. So just something to be wary of there. Oh, and you can also see that default with show power inline consumption default. And you can see here I set it back. I did the same thing here on the board. No power inline consumption 6500, and it went back to its setting of 15,400 milliwatts. Now to configure a high priority PoE interface, we would use the power inline static command. I'll show you this on the board as well. Now the max option is also here. You've got it with auto and you have it with this, with static. But high priority, what exactly does that mean? Well, the supervisor engine is actually guaranteeing power to the connected device. So it's not, you want to say, well, all of my ports are high priority. No, you really want to use this sparingly as well. And again, the command for that is power inline static. And if you want to change the max value, just add the max to the end of the command. Now, if you just don't want to do any of this stuff, if you just want to totally disable PoE, just put power inline never on the interface. There are no wattage options here. There's no watts, there's no milliwatts, there's no gigawatts, there's no nothing because we're disabling the port's ability to send power in the first place. So power inline never on your interface will get that job done. One final reminder, it's a general reminder, I know I just hit you over the head with this, but just a quick mention. You don't want to rush to your production network and just start putting a lot of devices on a switch via PoE. Please read Cisco's documentation on preparing for PoE installation before running with it. I know they always say that, right? But, just like not everyone reads the terms of service that are 47 pages long when you're installing software, you just go, just check the box. This is not just the usual yada yada, as Google once said. This is the real thing. You really do need to read those documentations on the documentation on preparing for installations before you run with it, because you're better off finding about power limitations and cooling needs before your PoE install than afterwards, because then it gets to be a little damaging to the switch. And the one thing you don't want to do is void that warranty. Keep your switches cool, and I will see you on the next video.